In late October of 1932, a group of Australian farmers stood staring at the remains of their wheat crops. Everything that had been a thick, fruitful field only days before was now flattened and strewn across the ground. And they knew exactly who was responsible. The large, flightless bird that had roamed free in Australia for millions of years, the emu. And over the next several weeks, the situation went from bad to worse as more and more emus descended upon the farmers' crops, destroying everything in sight. The farmers felt like they had no choice. They needed help and they needed it fast. So they appealed to the federal government, pleading with them to stop the emu menace. And the government agreed. Troops would be deployed. Soldiers would be sent to deal with the birds once and for all. Surely an army could defeat some birds, right? Right. But when the army arrived on the scene, things didn't go quite as planned. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to look at the bizarre, ridiculous and very real war between Australia and its own national bird, the emu. It was a cold and windy day in late November of 1932. Major Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery arrived at his post. He was a veteran of World War I, having fought in the famous Battle of Passchendaele. He was not afraid of hard work, and he had faced terrifying foes before. But when he stepped off the train, he saw his new enemy for the first time. At first glance, the emu looked a bit like an ostrich. Its feathers were dark grey and its neck was long and slender. The bird was massive, standing at about 6 foot tall and weighing up to 120 pounds. But without a doubt, the most striking thing about the emu was its beady little head and its intimidating beak, which could easily slash and cut through flesh and bone. Major Meredith would come to learn that the emu was not only vicious, but stubborn, fast, and utterly ruthless. He had orders to do whatever it took to control the emu population, destroy their eggs, and drive them away from farmland entirely. His weapons of choice were 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. Those weapons were impressive, but they were also a little impractical when the enemy could run as fast as a race car and beat a speeding truck with ease. Meredith led his team of 2 soldiers south of the town of Campion. There they met with local farmers who explained the scope of the problem. According to them, the emus had descended upon their crops in force. As many as 20,000 strong flocks moved through the area, destroying farms and ruining the livelihoods of the farmers. Without help, they might have to abandon their homes. Meredith knew how serious the situation was, but while the farmers spoke, he scanned the landscape. There wasn't much sign of the emus, and he began to wonder if the locals were exaggerating. Maybe the troops would be able to scare a few birds away, but surely there weren't 20,000 of them in the area. As he prepared to leave, one of his soldiers, Private James, pointed towards the top of a nearby hill. Sure enough, there were emus. A whole flock of them were perched atop the hill, looking out over the farmland. Just how many there were, Meredith couldn't say. All he knew was that the number was definitely more than a couple dozen. And so the battle began. Meredith set up his machine guns and aimed at the tops of the hills where the emus were perched. His plan was simple. If he could kill enough birds right off the bat, the rest would scatter and the emu problem would be over. But something unexpected happened. When Meredith fired his guns, the emus didn't budge. Rat-a-tat-tat. The bullets ripped into the hill, kicking up dirt and pebbles and forcing the men to shield their faces behind their guns. But the emus stayed put. Meredith shouted at his soldiers to stop firing. He knew the emus wouldn't move until he did something drastic, so he got into his truck and started driving towards the birds. As the truck approached, the emus finally bolted and fled. Now it was time to teach these birds a lesson they'd never forget. Rat-a-tat-tat. Meredith's guns roared. Birds flew into the air and fell out of the sky, dead. One by one, dozens of emus were mowed down, but the slaughter didn't last long. The bullets in the guns jammed, forcing Meredith to scramble out of his truck and try to fix the problem. Meanwhile, the surviving emus were running for cover. Meredith and his soldiers chased after them, but the birds were too quick. They darted in and out of the bushes, moving too fast for the truck to catch up. Once they disappeared, they were gone. Meredith did manage to fix his guns eventually, but the same thing happened again and again and again. No matter how many emus he shot, there seemed to be more where those came from. At least it didn't take long to find them. They usually stuck together in flocks, staying close to the areas where they found food. Meredith and his men traveled from farm to farm, chasing down the birds and shooting them on sight. But the emus kept coming, and each time Meredith opened fire, his soldiers had to dodge stones and sticks thrown at them by the angry birds. Finally, after weeks of fighting, Meredith was forced to give up. The soldiers had exhausted all of their ammunition, and the emu population remained completely unaffected. He wrote home to his wife, admitting that he had no idea how to get rid of the birds. According to him, they were, quote, the most destructive and at the same time the most unafraid of any birds I have ever seen. The government was furious, and for once it wasn't because of the emus' destruction of the wheat fields, it was because of the cost. Thousands of dollars had been spent, but hardly anything had been accomplished. Meredith was called back to headquarters, and the Great Emu War ended as quickly as it began. The farmers were devastated. They had hoped that the government would stand by them, but the army had proved ineffective, and they were on their own. For the time being, the emus won. In the end, around 2,500 rounds of ammunition were fired. Officially, fewer than 1,000 emus were killed. The soldiers returned to base, defeated by birds. And the emus, well, they continued doing what they had been doing all along, searching for food. Soon, the government came up with a new solution to the problem. Instead of sending soldiers to deal with the birds, they gave the farmers ammunition and let them hunt the emus themselves. Some farmers used shotguns. Others placed spikes around their crops to prevent the emus from landing. Still others built long fences, keeping the birds out of their fields. Eventually, the emu population decreased, and life returned to normal in Western Australia. The farms were saved, the emus were gone, and the military went back to doing what it did best, defending Australia from enemies that could actually be defeated. Today, the Great Emu War is often remembered as a joke, but it's also a reminder of the struggles people faced during the Depression. Farmers were desperate, the government was experimenting with unusual solutions, and the emus, well, they were just being emus. Today, the story lives on as one of the most bizarre chapters in military history. And there's even a monument commemorating the conflict outside the small town of Newdigate. It reads, quote, in November 1932, the emus attacked. Heavily armed and with high hopes, the soldiers advanced. But the birds, though tasty as a rule, are reputed to possess a strong community of resistance. The emus won the battle. The Great Emu War Memorial acknowledges their tenacity and pays tribute to the fighting qualities of the men and machines engaged in operations. Commemorated here are the digger, the soldier, the farmer, and the emu, each symbol of the spirit of survival. These days, it's rare for Australia to wage war on anyone, let alone birds. But every so often, they have to defend themselves from creatures big and small. Click here to watch this video about the weirdest animal attacks in Australia, or click here to watch this video, and if you haven't subscribed yet, well, click here to do that too. Thanks for watching.